Welcome to Sober Solutions. We are a weekly recovery podcast not affiliated with any particular 12-step or recovery program. However, you may hear us mention them. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and addict.
And welcome back to Sober Solutions Podcast. Tonight is episode 35. And tonight we're going to talk about setting healthy boundaries. And for me, I know it's been a process. This is definitely something that I'm still working on personally. And I know that learning to set healthy boundaries is really a process. So, Ben, why don't you kick us off tonight and talk to us a little bit about how you've set healthy boundaries or what your learning has been over this last 16 months of your sobriety on how to set healthy boundaries either in recovery or in your daily life.
The idea of boundaries was not something that I really contemplated before recovery, and it wasn't really something that I contemplated until, you know, deeper into recovery. After I came out of that, like not so much the fog, but like where I think it was the first thing where I began to, as I began to pull away from like the I don't want to. I guess it's a fog. This daily like where just not drinking is the only thing you're worried about. Boundaries was the first thing that kind of was like that I needed to start to establish, and I had no idea how to do it, and I don't know if I really have a great idea of how to do it now. But I know that they exist for a reason and they need to exist, and I don't. Yeah, and I don't look at it differently between recovery and my personal life. Like it's boundaries are boundaries, and one of my biggest faults or flaws or defects is my need to my need to over explain, my need for that validation, my need to just talk your ear off until you're telling me that I'm doing the thing that I should be doing. And that's what I did right out of recovery. And I thought that like if I came out and I just told everybody like this is what's going on, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm different, then it would be like, oh great, like they'll see that I'm completely changed and different. And they were like, hey, are you manic? And it's like, oh wait a second. When you don't set boundaries for yourself, you seem crazy. And so for me, it was kind of, really boundaries came in when it like I did the classic addict thing where I came out, I told everybody, and then I immediately reverted. They were like, okay, like that's a lot, that's too much. Don't know if you need to give us all of that. And then I was like, oh, fine, screw you. Then I'm going to give you nothing. And so for me, boundaries, like it really was with like my family at first, because it was this idea that like if they don't know, if I don't tell them, then they're not going to know that I'm getting better. And then if they don't know that I'm getting better, then my ex-wife's never going to, I was still trying to maintain the marriage at the time. And so it was a massive growing process. But, for me, boundaries are basically just a good, they're a motive checker. They're a good speed bump to just kind of say, are you going down the right road? Are you engaged in something you need to be engaged in? Or is this conversation going to add value to your life? Is it like, and so boundaries it's just a good emotional regulator for me. And again, I wish I had like a really good way to say this is exactly how I do it, but it's one of those things now where I find myself in situations that maybe I'm not terribly comfortable, and it becomes, okay, well, I have to check my motive. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Why am I engaged in this behavior? Why am I engaged in this conversation? Why am I engaged in this back and forth text message? What value is it adding? And if I can't answer that, then I set that boundary.
So, do you think that your boundaries change as the person in front of you changes? So, for instance, boundaries with people at work versus your boundaries with your girlfriend or your ex-wife versus boundaries with your family. Does that change based on the person that's in front of you?
Yeah, for sure. Like, like I like the way you said that because it changes depending on the person, and it also changes as the person changes. And so I've noticed that as um, throughout all of my relationships with my girlfriend, with my ex-wife, with my family members, like once I did, like putting up boundaries became a thing that I had to do. um, they were one thing at one point because that other person could either take or give, feedback or information that, or provide for a conversation that was helpful to me. And so it allowed me to kind of readjust what my boundaries are. Okay, I'll start to tell this person more because I've reached this level of, with them in this relationship, and building that trust that I could, you know say something to my ex-wife that isn't going to be taken out of context, or isn't going to be taken as um, something negative, that I wasn't trying to be sarcastic or anything like that. um, and when my girlfriend went through her relapse, like the boundaries there changed. Like, they had to change. So yeah, boundaries, that I don't think that it would work for me if I have like a hard and fast rule, like I don't talk about this with anyone, or I don't, because there's somebody for every emotion that I'm experiencing. There's a there's somebody, whether it's in my recovery network or my circle of friends or my family, or my girlfriend, whoever. There's somebody that I can share that emotion with. And so really boundaries for me is like just directing that emotion to that person and to that outlet. It's instead of telling everybody, hey, listen, this is where I'm at, take me or leave me. It forced me to kind of, have this more specific focus of like, I'm not going to go into all this detail about this topic with this person because they're just not ready for it, but this person can. But then, as you know you go on in these relationships, people's capacity to change is there. So if they, can be involved in a conversation, then it adapts from there. But yeah, it's kind of a moving target. But it's, as long as I think, as long as I'm aiming to have boundaries, that's the most important thing for me.
So, Chris, tell me a little bit about how your boundaries with people or with yourself have changed from before you got sober to now.
Before I got sober, I didn't even know what boundaries were. I don't think that necessarily, well, for me, like communication, for example, is another topic, but like communication and boundaries are things that are not properly taught at a young age. And I feel like, unless, in general, I would say they're not taught at a young age, unless you're going to therapy or have, parents that really set aside time for that. But it's something that I learned through recovery. I think boundaries is, it's almost like having a mutual respect. It's being able to say no, it's being able to communicate your feelings, and also being empathetic to other people's feelings and what their needs are. Now, your question was, how has it changed recently? So I would say previously to recovery, I was definitely a people pleaser. So if someone in my family needed anything, I would say yes, no matter how draining it was in my life. You guys see how, um, I would just say how much I have going on right now. Previously, I would jump if somebody said, hey, can you do this? Now I'm able to just say no, not feel bad. And hopefully they understand that it's not because I don't want to help. It's because I'm doing what's best emotionally for me at that time. And if I can help, I will. And I think that more importantly is the opposite. If somebody says no to me, in general, I'm able to understand that it's not this, it's not them attacking me and them not wanting to do something for me. And previously, I would probably go into this deep dive about why they hate me and this and that and the other. So it's really the understanding that it's okay to communicate whatever feelings you have, say no, and it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. No is a full sentence, right? Being able to set that boundary and really stand up for what you are feeling or going through or need to say in that moment. To follow up to what you were just talking about, Chris, do you think that saying yes to something when you just don't want to do it and you know that you should say yes, do you think that takes away from what you're doing for someone?
I just think that's an unhealthy boundary. If you're saying yes to something and you have this internal resistance, that's a really good sign that that's an unhealthy boundary. Sometimes you have to do certain things that give you that feeling. A good example would be like a job. Like, there's sometimes you just can't say no. But outside of required items, what I think is that would be a good sign that you have to look inside and say, is this serving me? Ben said, what are my motives? Does this add value? But I really think that what you're saying is a perfect example of a sign that you have unhealthy boundaries.
So I agree with you, and it took me a long time to be able to say no to someone and really feel okay with it. I always had that feeling of guilt or shame that was attached to me saying no to someone for help, or if they asked me to do something or go somewhere or help them with something, and I said no because I needed to prioritize myself in that moment, whether it was going to challenge my sobriety or I had something else that I could be doing that I needed to get done. um, Today, that is just like I said before, it's a sentence. I say no, and that's where it is. You know, when I think about setting boundaries, I really think about how setting boundaries is really around mutual respect. You know, when I was out drinking and drugging, I didn't have any respect for myself. I didn't have any respect for other people. And so I would cross boundaries all the time. And recently, my boyfriend and I have been going really fast in things. And we wanted to really kind of take a step back and see where we were at with the relationship. And he went on vacation and he asked for some space, and before I either wouldn't have understood that or I wouldn't have respected that. And I would have called him every day, text him every day, got into my head and was like, oh, space is bad. And like, all of this bullshit that would just come up in my head. Instead, I respected his boundaries. I respected his request, and we're seeing each other on Sunday, and being able to allow him to not just set the boundary but respect that boundary is a huge growing part on for me. It's a huge step in my own recovery, and my own progress as an adult, because I really, really wouldn't have been able to do that or respected his request when I was actively using.
Yeah, that shows a lot of growth. You were talking about guilt and shame previously when you were in active addiction. Why do you think that addicts and alcoholics tend to have unhealthy boundaries?
It's a great question. Um, I think it has a lot to do with respect, like I was just talking about, but also the fact that we never knew how to fully develop them or fully set them ourselves. We were always, for lack of a better phrase, pushing the boundary with our health, with the law, with, relationships. We were always trying to test to see how far we could go. At least that was what it was like for me. I mean, I can think of at least half a dozen times that I ruined a car, lost a job, cheated on a ex-partner, and I came back and said, "Hey, I'll never do that again. Please take me back. I'll go into the rooms for a few days, few months, whatever it was, and just do it again because I didn't know like what respectful, healthy boundaries looked like." Um, when I would get asked for space in previous relationships, I never, never honored that because my mind went to this person is going to leave you. This person is going to cheat on you. This person doesn't really love you. This person doesn't really want you. And so they're asking for this space to eventually get away from you. And I hated myself so much that I believed all that shit in my head. And so my automatic response to that was don't let them go. Don't let them have this space because space means separation. And if I hold tighter, if I buy them something, if I take them somewhere, if I call them all the time, if I text them all the time, then that's showing them that I really should be here with them. But that was just my own self-loathing in disguise. And so I never understood that not just setting a healthy boundary, but honoring a healthy boundary is all about respect.
Yeah, I agree. In addition, there's usually a reason why people become alcoholics or addicts, and it's in the internal, right? You mentioned that um, you didn't have respect for yourself. A lot of times it has to do with, not only did your parents not teach it, but a lot of alcoholics and addicts have parent issues. They have trauma, they have this, they have that. And with all of that, whether it's trauma or parenting things, what I've seen is most times people have something, and it's not, hey, I liked drinking or drugging. It's the internal that really caused them to continue. And I think that has a really big impact into why a lot of times alcoholics and addicts don't know how to set healthy boundaries. On the contrary, what I find amazing is once we're taught how to do it, I think that when you're working, like we are all working the steps on this podcast, but whatever program you're doing, mostly all of them teach boundaries. And we go from being the worst at it to almost being the best at it. And that's something that I love about recovery is that we're able to communicate boundaries properly. You know, Previously, I think I would always shy away from being honest with like my parents, because I'd be afraid to hurt their feelings. But what that would just do is make me feel worse and not communicate, not actually solve anything. And so what I've found over the last year is that, it might be uncomfortable for a minute or two, but in the long run, it's a really big positive, and it gets to the root of whatever issue is at hand.
So one of my questions that I have, and as I was getting ready for this episode, I was really wondering about this because I have an example for myself, but I'm interested to hear what your hardest boundary has been to set since you got sober.
The hardest boundary to set. It would have been really nice in your preparation for this episode if you had shared that with us so that we could have, at a moment, because there are a number, um, but I kind of go back to what I said at the beginning, where I don't know if I started out intentionally setting boundaries. So um, so they've just kind of come as like a way of doing business. Um, I think the hardest boundary would be probably with my family overall, um, because there's it's not just my three siblings and my parents, but my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law. Um, there are like seven different relationships there, and it's so I think the hardest one has been like navigating all of those, like and realizing that, like, because before, like, it was just like you just go and you tell the tribe, and the tribe does what they do with whatever you had to say, and that's the way it's always been, um, forever, for everything in my family. Um, but so, like, figuring out that, like, sharing this bit of information with one sister will get this reaction, while sharing the same bit of information with another sister will get this bit of reaction, while sharing, or even like sharing like parts of the same story, but only sharing certain parts of it with certain people, so that you can feel like you're still communicating with them, but you're also just, it seems as though you're trying to manipulate, which, I mean, essentially that's what it is. So like having the, it's, so it's been easy to, like, for with like somebody with my mom, who I could just, say, tell her whatever, and she'll get it and process it. Like, my dad's completely different. In fact, tonight I was there for dinner, and he had this little look on his face. And Ryan, I can tell you right now, as my mother's listening to this, she's going to be laughing. The He had this look on his face, like he just had to say something, and they were getting ready to walk out the door to go to their Al-Anon meeting, and the the specifics there, with my dad. There's not really a ton of specifics. He just wants his children to live their lives the way that he thinks would be the easiest for them, not what they think is the easiest, but or the best, but like, if you did this or this, your life would be so much easier. um, and so, he's just got all these questions about, am I in this relationship for the long haul? And what am I going to do if my lease, if they jack my rent up a couple $100s, or, like, all these questions that, like, yeah, I've thought about all these things, but, like, they don't consume me. So, but he was able to say his piece, and, me and my father never used to communicate. And so, he said his piece, and my mom's just kind of sitting there laughing, like, and he literally goes at one point, he's like, I'm breaking every Al-Anon rule right now, I know. But that's where he was. That's where he is right now. I mean, that's how he's always been. But so, like, to go back to what something you said before, Jason, about how, like, you would have taken it personally, and you would have gotten in your feels, and it would have been an issue, and you would have been like, well, why are they doing this? What is this about? Like, because I have that boundary that, I don't need to, like, have, get that validation. I don't need for him to understand every action or thought that I have. I can just take it and say, I hear you, I get you, I totally understand. Um, but this is just where I'm at, and this is how I'm dealing with it, and that's never a satisfying answer for a guy who just wants to be listened to. And so I was driving home. I dropped my daughter's off. I was driving home, and he called me, and he was like, I appreciate you hearing me out, and he goes, and then saying my piece, and that only happens because there's that boundary there that exists, and I don't have to. I don't have to turn it into this big fight. It's something that we're just not going to agree on. And this just goes for everything. Like this, like if I come across something that is going to be contentious or you can disagree. We don't have to get there anymore. We don't have to, it doesn't have to, devolve into this big, huge thing. So to answer your original question, I think the hardest one has not been setting one, it's been setting boundaries amongst a group where just, those boundaries might not have existed before.
I think no one asked, but I'll jump in. My hardest one is kind of on the opposite. It's allowing my wife to have her own boundaries, and specifically around letting her feel her feelings. And it's really hard for me. It still is hard for me, but over the last year, I've gotten better at it, but I'm still not there 100% around her triggers. And there's certain times that, specifically, like if I get really tired, and lately I've been waking up at 3:34 in the morning to get to the city by 6 a.m. And, I'm exhausted when I come home because we're working just tons of hours right now. And so she gets these, she'll get upset because sometimes I'll look, feel, act tired, and that brings back a lot of emotions for her. And I get immediately defensive. And, a boundary that I'm working on is allowing her to feel that without judgment, without defending myself, without, stepping in and having to explain. And, what I find is when I don't do all those things, when I don't sit there, defend myself, jump in, argue, it goes away really fast. And she's appreciative. However, the contrary is when I do all those things, it turns into a big argument when she could just work through it internally if I just didn't say anything. So I think that's my hardest boundary that I'm trying to still work.
Yeah, and that's a hard one. I totally agree with you that allowing other people the space, especially people who aren't sober, right? Because they don't have a program like we do, and they're just trying to figure out their life the best way that they can. At the end of the day, we get a chance to fall back on the steps. We get a chance to say, how the fuck am I going to figure this out? And oh, the answer is right here in step 3 or step 7 or step 12 or whatever it is. Or we have each other to fall back on. We have our meetings to fall back on. We have our sponsors to fall back on. And, it's just another example that for those people in our lives who don't have that and don't have the support and the resources and the ability to fall back on something, how hard it is for them. You know, Ben, when you were talking about the setting boundaries with your dad, it took me back to when I think I was still actively using then. But my father and I would get into some stupid arguments, stupid arguments. Um, and he's very opinionated, as am I. But he started to use this phrase of like, this is just my thought. This is just my opinion. I'm allowed to have my opinions. And I never respected that boundary of him being able to voice what he wanted to. I was always combative. I never took a step back to understand his side of things. And now, I mean, I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago that we were getting into an argument, and it was a political debate. And at one point, I was just like, Dad, I can't have this conversation anymore. And he tried to keep it going for a little bit. And I said, Dad, I can't have this conversation anymore because I felt myself getting angry and upset about what he was saying. And I just didn't have the facts and figures to back it up of what I was saying. And so I said, do you know what? I can't have this conversation right now. And it ended because I set a boundary, and we came back maybe 10 minutes later and everything was fine. Where before it would have been this really long argument, I would have said something that I didn't mean because I'm very visceral with my ability to cut people down. And I would have felt bad. I probably would have had like a bottle or a bag hidden in my room that I would have went and hit, and that would have calmed me down for a second or made me more agitated. But I didn't. I set this healthy boundary, and it was honored by him, and everything was great after that. So we were able to continue and preserve the relationship that we've been able to build over the last 16 months because I set that boundary.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about, people who are not in recovery, I think that's what makes the relationship with my mom so much different than with anybody else, because she has a program, in Al-Anon, that she works really hard and is really involved in, and so she has those tools where she can also set the boundaries, and she has this level of acceptance that even though she still worries about me as a parent, as any parent worries about their child, she's able to, take a step back, and like I said, she has her own boundaries that I get to respect. Like it's I don't feel this need to like just jump in and be like, oh, you're on my side, you have to be on my side about all of these things. Like, no, it's just this open conversation that can really happen. And when you juxtapose that to, my dad, who's also goes to the Al-Anon meetings, so, but it's the same way. He's gone to church with my mother for 30 some odd years. He's not a Catholic. He goes because my mother goes, but it's not having that program of recovery is preventing him to get to that place where he can set boundaries and respect boundaries and have acceptance. And so it's, people in recovery, people that are not in recovery, they can have that. There are programs out there, but yeah, I think the more we talk about it, I think definitely the boundaries that are the most difficult are the ones with the people that were around the most.
So, what's it like when you know that you're setting a healthy boundary? Or I guess I'll step back and say, now that we all have over a year, do you know when you're setting an unhealthy boundary, or do you know when you're crossing someone's boundary or your own? And then the second part of that question is, what does that feel like for you now as someone in recovery to know that you have crossed a boundary, and what do you do about it, Ben?
Yeah, I can answer both of those in one question, because being in recovery now, I know when I'm crossing a boundary because it feels dirty. It feels old. It feels like what I used to do. Like you know that you're doing something to elicit a certain reaction, or you're saying something because you're trying to get what you want, and it just feels different. It feels manipulative, and it's the subtle stuff that I didn't realize early on in recovery, when people were like, you're still manipulating, you're still manipulating. I'm like, no, I'm not drinking, I'm not hiding, I'm not doing anything. And it's like, no, you're crossing these boundaries that you really don't have any business crossing them, because you're still trying to look out for number one. And so yeah, so for me, being in recovery is how I know that I'm doing it. And I guess the second, the my not rebuttal, but my follow up to that would be that the way I stop that is to just literally stop, to not try to like, dig my way out of it, or try to save face, or just stop, take that pause, and just step back and realize, like, okay, listen, if you were going into this for the wrong reasons, then there's really nothing to salvage here. It's just you know what, just scrap that whole thing and start over.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's all about how it makes you and others feel. And Jason, you said it in the beginning, it's about mutual respect. So when you have a healthy boundary and there's mutual respect around that boundary, you know, it only positive comes out of it. And when, like Ben says, your intentions are looking out for number one, you feel it and you know it's there. And usually it becomes contentious and doesn't have a positive result. So, you know, I think we would all agree, although we have a year, we still have a lifetime of recovery and growing to do. Like, you know, I'm 100 times better than I was last year, but I still have tons more to grow. And I love that there's always more to learn and accept. And, you know, that's one thing I love about recovery is that I'm never there, right? But additionally, with how it's not just about a feeling. I think it's about the result, right? When you have healthy boundaries, I think that you grow with the people around you. You know, you probably have different boundaries with your friends, with your family, with coworkers, with social circles. They all might vary, but I think that the result would all be the same. And you could feel that. Like if you have a healthy boundary, although they differ within the different you know, settings, the result will be the same.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what you said around it's a learning process. I mean, you said it earlier too, Chris. I was never taught how to set boundaries. You know, it's something that I have really learned by trial and error, I think. But also with defining what my core beliefs are, what my core values are, and not straying from that. And you know, if I'm a hard ass with not really being able to compromise or accommodate at times based on the fact that I need to be X, Y, and Z because those are my beliefs and values. I'm not really building those relationships. And, you know, setting boundaries and relationships, like we've been talking about all night, really go hand in hand. Um, Something I'm interested in hearing from both of you is around something that you said, Ben, around this concept of manipulation. You know, I mean, me calling someone when they say they need space is complete manipulation. But do you find that there are some people in your life still who say that it's manipulative or define it as manipulation when you're trying to set boundaries? This happened to me recently, and it took me right back to how I really was being manipulative in my addiction, but I wasn't being manipulative in this situation. I was just setting a boundary with this person.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Chris was saying about, you know, when his wife experiences something now, she's taken back to a time that elicits a certain memory or feeling. And I imagine that to be a similar situation. And again, that's something that I experienced too in the aftermath of that whole like discovery process of people being like you're why are you saying this, what's your motive behind saying that, like what do you, you know, and it wasn't that I was, you know, trying to, you know, manipulate anything. I was just trying to protect myself, um and it wasn't, you know, I didn't need to explain it any further than that. And so, yeah, I think that people can perceive it as manipulation, which I mean, I guess if we want to mince words, that maybe you are manipulating for yourself, but you're manipulating for yourself in a healthy way to say, this is where I can't go. I
I
can't
think
do
it's
this.
more advocating for yourself, right?
Right. Yeah. You're right. You're advocating for yourself. But again, people might feel like, oh, here's Jason looking, this is just what he wants. So he did this to get this. And maybe that's, maybe that's the case. But, I think the reality is that we, again, if you go back to check your motive and figure out, okay, what are you, why are you setting this boundary? Am I being manipulative? And if you can be honest with yourself and say, no, I'm not trying to manipulate anything. I just want to set this boundary. That goes back to acceptance. That, listen, you have to accept that that's where that person is. That's how that, Jason, just like your dad said, like, this was my thought. This is my feeling. Okay, well, that's their thought or that's their feeling. Like, you can't control that. So, it's just keeping your side of the street clean is all you can do at that point. And we've said it a billion times on this podcast. We took, we walked 10 miles into this son of a bitch, and it's going to take it's going to take every bit of 10 miles to get out, and we're going to have to heal every step of the way.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add as far as I think the people around me, when I said healthy boundaries, respect it. What I would say is there are certain times that I do find myself being manipulative. And that's when I get that gut feeling. There's very rarely times where I've actually encountered the situation that you have, Jason. And I think that's because my circle is growing with me, and I probably have a smaller circle now with just with the boundaries that I set. But there are certain times that I do actually get called out for being manipulative. And when I do a deep dive into myself, I do find that sometimes, hey, maybe my motives weren't great. And I think the growth lies in I can admit to that and either apologize or not, and just change.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, motives. Something that I was talking about with a friend yesterday was how some people in recovery fall back on, I'm in recovery. And so I acted like this, because I'm in recovery. And I just throw my hands up and say, I'm not responsible. It's my disease. But as long as we're taking that responsibility, we're being accountable. And like you said, Chris, if we do that reflection on what we've done, and if we can come out and say, listen, no, I was setting a boundary that wasn't manipulation, then that's what it is. I think a big part of setting boundaries is also being able to stand up for oneself. I know for me, when I was in my active addiction, I was a doormat and I let everybody walk all over me. And now when I do stand up for myself, now when I do set that boundary, I have to reaffirm that with myself, that I deserve this too. And it's not just the other person's needs that I need to meet, but I need to meet my own first. So I absolutely think, I think that is a big part of setting healthy boundaries. Well, boys, thank you so much for your time on this topic tonight. I think we'll stop there. And as always, each and every single one of our episodes is dedicated to the still sick and suffering alcoholic and addict, especially the individual who's going to pick up for the first time tonight. Have a good night, guys.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
We appreciate your liking and subscribing to our podcast. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support our podcast, feel free to Venmo $1 to our virtual basket at Sober Solutions Podcast. We want to hear from you too. If you have a comment, question, topic, or would like to come on the show, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Sober Solutions Podcast. Or you can shoot us an email to sobersolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And if you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show.